Hello, everybody. Uh, Looks like this week we were able to get it started on time. We're learning. We're using a microphone this time, so I hope the volume is a little better than it was the last time. So, the subject tonight encounters, the encounters that we have in life. There is a story, you may have heard me tell this story before, of a fellow named Moshe. Any story that has someone named Moshe is always a good story. And he interviewed for a job with an accounting firm. And the fellow interviewing him, his name was Bob, looks over the resume and he says, "Wow, you're perfect for this job. I mean, everything that we're looking for you have on this resume, the experience, the education, perfect, perfect. There's just one problem. I don't know why you needed to exaggerate. You exaggerate on your resume, and there was just no need for that. I mean, you have the job." So Maishala says, "I don't know what you're talking about. I never exaggerated. Everything I write there is absolutely true." So Bob says, "Maishala, it says here that you know everyone in the world. When I ask for references, you say references. I know everyone in the world. Everyone in the world. No one knows everyone in the world." Maishala says, "No, that's not true. I know everyone. You go ahead, try me. Pick somebody. I'll show you I know him. You know everybody in the world. I know everybody in the world." Well, Bob happens to be a big Yankee fan. And he says, "Okay, do you know Aaron Judge, right fielder of the New York Yankees, home run hitter?" Maishala says, "Aaron Judge, I happen to know him quite well." "You don't know Aaron Judge?" I do. So Maishala says, "Bob, you know what? I'm going to prove it to you. We're going to go and you're going to buy 2 tickets for us to fly to Kennedy Airport. And we're going to then take a limousine that you'll cover, and we'll go to Yankee Stadium. And you're going to get 2 box seats, good seats, front row seats at Yankee Stadium for both of us to go. And watch what happens when Judge passes by the area where we're sitting and he just notices that I'm in the stand. Just watch." Bob says, You're on. I got to see this for myself. 2 tickets, JFK Airport, limousine service, Yankee Stadium, 2 box seats. They're watching the game in the days that there used to be baseball. By the way, Yankees still undefeated this season, still undefeated. It's already May, still undefeated. We're doing good. So anyway, Bob and Moshe are sitting there in the stands. Judge passes by. He takes a look. "Moshe, what are you doing here in New York? I didn't know you were coming in." Bob is freaking out. How is it possible that Aaron Judge knows Moshe? But he does. It's amazing. Judge says, "Hey, listen, after the game, come to the dugout. You'll meet the rest of the players." Moshe says, Can I bring Bob along?" "Yeah, bring him along, sure." And after the game, they go to the dugout. They meet all the players. Bob is amazed. "Wow, you really did know him?" "Yep." "But you don't know everyone in the world. You still don't believe me? Try. Do you know President Trump?" "President Trump? Of course I know Trump." "You don't know President Trump, Maishala?" I do. Watch. Let's go to a press conference. Let's go to Washington. We'll get tickets to the White House. We'll get press passes. And watch what happens when Trump comes into his press conference, which are usually feisty events. Watch what happens when he sees that I'm in the room. You're on. They get tickets to Washington. They get their tickets to the White House from their congressman, and they somehow get a press pass, and they're into the press room. Trump comes in, and he's having his typical fights with fake news with everyone that's there. And then he gives a look. "Maishala, what are you doing here in Washington? I didn't know you were in town. After this press conference, why don't you come into the Oval Office with me? We'll schmooze a little bit." Can I bring Bob along?" "Sure, bring Bob along." And they go to the Oval Office, and Trump is there speaking with them, schmoozing with them. Bob is freaking out. This is over. And Bob says, "Wow, all right, I got to give it to you. Somehow you knew Judge, and somehow you knew Trump, but you don't know everyone in the world." Maishala says, What do I need to do to prove it to you?" "One more. Let's try one more." "Okay. Do you know the Pope?" "The Pope?" "Happen to know the Pope well." "You don't know the Pope well." "I do. I spent some time in South America. got to know him. We became friends. Yeah, you don't know the Pope, Moshe. You know what? 2 tickets to Rome. We're going to go to the Vatican. And let's be outside when they're holding Mass and see what happens when the Pope sees that I'm in the crowd. The Pope doesn't know you. He's not going to see you in the crowd. They go 2 tickets to Rome. They go to the Vatican. There they are amongst hundreds of thousands of people. The Pope comes out and he's doing his Mass. And all of a sudden, the Pope goes this, Moshe. He spots Moshe far, far in the crowd, Moshe, and he's waving for Moshe to come all the way to him, make his way up. Of course, everyone makes an aisle as Moshe makes his way all the way up to where the Pope is standing saying his Mass. And he gets up on stage together with the Pope, and he's looking for Bob. He's looking for Bob, and he sees Bob, and Bob faints. That's it. Couldn't handle it anymore. He makes his way running back to Bob. They revive Bob. And he says, Bob, what's wrong? I told you, I know everyone in the world. Why wouldn't you believe me? Why did you faint? He says, listen here, Moshe, somehow I was able to deal with the fact that you knew Aaron Judge from the New York Yankees. Okay. Somehow I was able to deal with the fact that you knew President Trump. Okay, I got over that. But what I couldn't handle is when I was standing over here and I watched you get up on stage and the person next to me said, who's the fellow dressed in white standing next to Moshe? Now, it's very hard to tell a joke using these YouTube Lives and Zooms and Facebook Live because I can't hear if any of you actually are laughing. It's very hard to tell a joke. I don't know how the comedians are doing Zoom comedy shows without having an audience. Encounters, the encounters that we have in our life, the people that we meet in our lives, the people that we know in our lives, each and every single one of us, we have a story to tell. Each and every single one of us, we have a movie that we could make about the chapters of our lives, the roads that we have traveled, the diverse roads that we have been on to bring us to this point. If I was to ask you, how did you get to this moment of life? How did you get here to this very moment? How many stops along the way did it take for you to get to this moment? How many choices? How many coincidences? How many career moves for each of us to be where we are right now? You know, it's our own version of Close Encounters. We can write our own book of close encounters that we have had in our lives. There was a rabbi from Los Angeles that shared that during the eclipse in 2017, it took place on August 21st, he went with his family to Casper, Wyoming, to experience the totality of the solar eclipse. Those 2 minutes and 26 seconds during which the moon totally covered the sun. And that's a long way to go for 2 minutes and 26 seconds. But afterwards, he recounted the experience. And he said that they viewed the eclipse along with both veteran astronomers, amateur astronomers, regular folks, everyone coming together. And these astronomers were happy to explain everything that was going on. And they learned about the universe's planetary system in the hours leading up to the eclipse itself. And the astronomers told them that before you go into what they called totality, you need to have a plan how you will spend those 146 seconds. What you're going to see during that time, absorb and think about during those 146 seconds. And he described how the tension mounted as they counted down the seconds to when they would experience the unimaginable. With 80% of the sun being covered by the moon, they could feel the temperatures dropping. They could feel the wind picking up. At 90%, they could sense the sunlight growing weaker, like a late afternoon on a winter day. And with a minute to go to totality, they noticed the western horizon darkening as a giant shadow started racing towards them. And then, all at once, the entire crowd roared, wow, as the moon completely covered the sun. The birds went silent. Night fell. Stars came out. We were living in totality. It was the fastest, most spectacular 2 minutes and 26 seconds of my life, this rabbi wrote. And we didn't want it to end. It was this paranormal experience, like a physical encounter with God. Everyone around us was stunned, holding on to this moment. Even veteran eclipse chasers were overcome with a sense of awe, enjoying the experience. The rabbi said that he made it a point to say the Shema at that moment, during those 2 minutes, to spiritually lock in the moment forever. And to every time he would think about this moment, he would think about his relationship to God. I'll never let go of that moment. And I'll always thank God that I experienced it, that I had it. Now, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't among those that got too caught up with the whole eclipse fervor in August of 2017. I don't think I even went out and bought those funny glasses. I think I was driving, it came, and it went. But after reading the rabbi's account, I must say that I admire what he did with his family. In fact, I envy those that got into it like that and were able to have such an experience by it. And the truth is that we all encounter moments of awe in our lives, moments of wonder, moments of inspiration. And for some of us, it's very nice. And what's next? What else do you got? And for some of us, it's wow, this is amazing. This is incredible. This is awesome. Some people can look at the Grand Canyon and stare at the hole in the ground for hours and hours. Some can go and just look and say, okay, time to go home. So, which one of those are you? The answer is, of course, whichever one you choose to be. I'm sure you remember the name of this lecture tonight is taken from Steven Spielberg's 1977 science fiction film, though he called it Close Encounters of a Third Kind. And it's a story of an everyday individual whose life changes after an encounter with a UFO, with intelligent life from another planet. The theme of my talk tonight is slightly different. It's close encounters of a holy kind. You see, throughout our lives, we all have momentous encounters with God. We have momentous encounters with our fellow human being. The question is what we do with those precious moments, what we do with those awesome moments, what we do with those potentially life-changing encounters. Do we cherish them? Do we preserve them? Or do we let them fly off into space as if they never mattered at all? Captain Charles Plum was a jet fighter pilot from the United States Navy in the 1970s. He flew 74 successful missions during the Vietnam War. His squadron, flying F-4 Phantom jets, would take off from the aircraft carrier, the Kitty Hawk. On his 75th mission, 5 days before his tour of duty was supposed to end, Captain Plum's plane was shot down over Hanoi. Plum parachuted from his plane and he landed in enemy territory. He was captured as a prisoner of war for more than 5 years. He was tortured mercilessly, but somehow he survived. And when the war was over and there was the exchange of prisoners after his return home, Captain Plum was hailed as a hero. He gave lectures throughout the country about his ordeal. Everyone wanted an interview with Captain Plum about his experiences as a prisoner of war and as a pilot. One night, Captain Plum was in a restaurant in Missouri. He had just finished lecturing there, and he noticed the man sitting 2 tables away was staring at him. This fellow continued to stare. He didn't recognize him, but he clearly felt the presence that this man just kept his eyes right on him. And it at first was, he's used to this. Everyone's always staring at him. He was a recognized person, but this fellow just continued to stare to the point where it made him a bit uncomfortable. And finally, the fellow got up from his table and walked over to Captain Plum and he said, "You're Captain Charles Plum, right?" And he said, "Yeah. How do you know me?" He said, you flew from the Kitty Hawk, right? He said, yeah. Do we know each other? You were shot down, right? Yeah. You parachuted into Hanoi, right? Yeah. You were captured by the Vietnamese. Yeah. How do you know everything about me? Captain Plum asked. To which the fellow said, I was on the Kitty Hawk. I served on the Kitty Hawk when you were a pilot there. In fact, I was the one that packed your parachute, sir. Captain Plum was speechless. He stood up, he shook the man's hand warmly. He wanted to thank the man, but somehow a simple thank you seemed to be empty compared to what he would have wanted to say. If only the words could come to him. And finally, the fellow broke the silence and said, well, I guess the parachute worked. And when the ice broke and the two men engaged in warm conversation, and Captain Plum said, I've said lots of prayers and thanks for your nimble fingers, but I never thought I would have the opportunity to thank you in person. He left the restaurant in emotional turmoil. He couldn't sleep that night as he wondered over and over, did I ever even notice this fellow on the Kitty Hawk? And if I did I ever say hello? Did I ever say good morning? Probably not. After all, he was just a sailor and I was a Top Gun fighter pilot. And then he asked himself this, how many hours did that man spend putting together that parachute for me? I never thought about those guys down in the lower decks of the Kitty Hawk until my life depended on that parachute. It was an eye-opening experience for Charles Plum, but it should also be an eye-opening experience for all of us that hear this story. Are there people in our past who packed our parachutes? And have we ever properly acknowledged and thanked them for the central role that they played in our lives? People who gave us strength when we needed it most. Parents who stayed up endless nights during our childhood illnesses or to put up with our teenage antics. Doctors who nursed us back to health. Teachers who imparted knowledge that we use for the rest of our lives. Or camp counselors who gave us experiences of a summer that stayed with us for all of our lifetime. We shouldn't forget these people. And if they're still with us, it's not too late to get in touch with them, to call them, to find their email address, and just say, I just want you to know you had a great impact on my life. The Torah tells us that when our forefather Jacob was returning to the land of Israel after spending 20 years in the home of his crooked and conniving uncle Lavan, that a woman named Devorah passed away. And the Torah goes on to tell us that Jacob buried Devorah on the way, and he named the name of the burial place Alon Bachus, the Plateau of Tears. And right after that, we're told that God appeared to Jacob again, this after having been a long period where God did not appear to him. Who was this Devorah? Why did Jacob see it that he wanted to make this mass funeral for Devorah and eulogize Devorah? And what did God's appearance right after this funeral have anything to do with it or with this woman? The answer as to who Devorah was, the Torah tells us she was Menekes Rivka. Jacob's mother, Rebecca, Devorah was her wet nurse, her nanny. So she was Jacob's mother's nanny. You see, Devorah lived in a household with some very unsavory characters, Lavan and Besuel. But when Rebecca was born, Devorah recognized something special about this child. And she saw Rivka's godly potential, and she dedicated herself to developing Rivka's goodness. She didn't just nurse her and nurture her in the physical sense. She gave her spiritual encouragement. She gave her reinforcement amidst the toxic environment in which she lived. Jacob never forgot. He never lost sight of what this woman did for his mother. And so when he departed with his family from Lavan's house, he took Devorah along with them. He took her in her very old age. And when she passed away, he eulogized her and gave her a send-off befitting a righteous woman. Because in a sense, Devorah the nanny had packed Rivka's parachute, making it possible for her to become the mother of a saintly man like Jacob and to become the matriarch of the Jewish people. And when God saw that Jacob had that level of appreciation for those who made a difference in life, enabling him, whether directly or indirectly, to become the man he was, God rewarded Jacob for this by appearing to him again. There was a rabbi named Rabbi Schneur Zalman Valenkin of blessed memory. Rabbi Valenkin was the Malamed. He was the teacher in a cheder that the Lubavitcher Rebbe went to when he was a child, when he lived in Yekaterinoslav in Ukraine. So Rabbi Valenkin gave the Rebbe his early start in Jewish education. When Rabbi Valenkin came to the United States in the 1950s, his former student had already become the Rebbe. Rabbi Valenkin visited the Rebbe in the Rebbe's office in Brooklyn, New York. Now, usually when most people had a private audience with the Rebbe was sitting behind the desk, and the visitor preferred to stand out of respect for who the Lubavitcher Rebbe was. In this case, the moment Rabbi Valenkin walked into the room, the Rebbe stood up. And Rabbi Valenkin was embarrassed. This is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Please don't stand up for me. I'm just a simple chassid. And the Rebbe refused to sit. He motioned for Rabbi Valenkin to sit. And Rabbi Valenkin said, I'm not going to sit in the presence of the Rebbe. To which the Rebbe said, I won't sit in the presence of you unless you sit. So the two of them spent the entire audience standing, each refusing to sit in the presence of the other. Years later, at another private audience, Rabbi Valenkin once again refused to sit. And with Rabbi Valenkin being advanced in age at the time, and the Rebbe realized this is going to happen again, the Rebbe said, many years ago when we studied in Cheder, when you were my Malamed, you sat and I sat. We both sat together. So why don't we reenact that? And both of us sit at the very same time. And Rabbi Valenkin accepted that, and the two sat down. On other occasions, Rabbi Valenkin would try to enter the synagogue, the 770 Eastern Parkway, inconspicuously when the Rebbe was addressing thousands of his followers. But every time that the Rebbe would spot him in the crowd, the Rebbe would do this. He would stand up from his seat for a moment just to show respect for his Rebbe when he was but a 5-year-old child. In 1963, when Rabbi Valenkin passed away, the Rebbe paid for his burial and for the erection of the matzeva of the gravestone, and he wanted to pay for it out of his own money. He asked the rabbi's children for each one to pay $1 so that they can participate in the mitzvah of honoring their father, but otherwise he asked that he have the honor of covering the costs. This was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who over the years went on to study with some of the greatest Torah scholars of the era, who went on to become the Jewish leader of our generation. Yet he never lost sight or failed to acknowledge the contributions of those who impacted his life from the earliest of days. If the Rebbe can do it, we should be able to do that as well. So, my friends, who packed your parachute? Even beyond the obvious and the prominent individuals who come to mind, who was that someone that appeared in your life just at the right place and at the right time? As much as it may seem like happenstance that this person told you, he or she told you, it did for you at that particular moment, but at that critical juncture, at that critical moment of life, I would suggest that from a bigger and broader view of things, these were close encounters of the momentous kind. These were close encounters of a holy kind. These were pre-planned. These were destined. These were acts of divine providence that God brought into your life at particular moments, at particular times. When the Germans invaded Poland in September of 1939, sparking the outbreak of World War II, the Chabad yeshiva in which my father was studying at the time immediately disbanded. And for a long while, it was every man for themselves, until many of them met up later in Vilna, Lithuania. My father recalled how during those chaotic days, people were running in all different directions. My father wanted to go home, but as you may have heard the story from me before, by divine providence, he could not get a ticket on the last train out of Warsaw to the region of his hometown. And that ultimately saved his life. And so there he was, a 16-year-old kid with a little suitcase, literally all alone in the world. And he's watching people running through the streets this way and that way with no clue where to go. And suddenly, he says, out of the blue, a Jew came up to him and said to him firmly, "Go to Bialystok. Whatever you do, get yourself to Bialystok." At least now he had a destination. He knew where he had to go. Spotting a Gentile truck driver, he asked if by any chance he was going to Bialystok. The truck driver said that he was, and for a few zlotys, he allowed him to climb into the back of his truck and ride with him all the way to Bialystok. And the rest is history. From Bialystok, he moved on to Baranovich. From there to Vilna. From there, he merited to get one of the visas from Chiun Sugihara. From there, he made his way to Moscow. From Moscow to Vladivostok. From Vladivostok to Japan. From Japan to Shanghai. Years later, from Shanghai to San Francisco. From San Francisco to New York. But that first stop, that first escape from the inferno, run to Bialystok. When my father would recount the story, he said that that man appeared out of nowhere. I never saw him before. I never saw him after. And he told me, go to Bialystok. That saved my life. Because those who remained or went in different directions, sadly and tragically, they didn't make it. This is how things often happen for many of us. Someone whom you can barely remember, if at all, plays at the time perhaps a seemingly minor act, and then just as quickly as he or she appeared in your life, they're gone, never to be heard from again. It's as if they existed for that one purpose, to cross our paths this one time and change the entire direction of our lives. Can be a person you run into at the Kotel Hamaravi. How many stories have we heard about encounters at the Western Wall, about encounters in Israel, about encounters on the plane, about encounters in an airport, about encounters in a synagogue somewhere in the United States? You invite someone to your Shabbat table that happens to be visiting, and he takes notice of your son and he says, "Oh, do I have a match for him? I know a daughter of someone in my hometown," and suddenly a shidduch is made. A marriage is made, and mazel tov, and there's grandchildren to come, all from a simple coincidence of someone needing a place to eat for a Friday night dinner. Who packed your parachutes? Who were they? Do we stop and think about these encounters of our lives, close encounters of a holy kind? I want to tell you the story of a former soldier in the Israeli Defense Force. For the purpose of this story, we'll call him Yaron. Yaron, like many in the IDF service, after he finished his time in the service, he traveled to Asia after the army before returning to civilian life. As a youngster, Yaron had attended a government religious school, but the farther he traveled from Israel and the longer he stayed away, the less observant he became. And by the time he came to India, he was totally removed from a Jewish way of life. He traveled across the country, making new friends, taking in all sorts of different cultural experiences, I guess we'll call it. One night, he was in a bar with friends in Mumbai, and suddenly he hears a sound. It's a familiar sound. He knows that sound, but it's impossible. He hears the sound of a shofar. He knows the sound of a shofar. But why do I hear a shofar when I'm in a bar in Mumbai, India? And he listens closely. Sure enough, it's a shofar. He knows that sound. He runs out of the bar. He's looking up and down the streets. He doesn't see anything. Why would anyone be blowing a shofar in the streets of Mumbai, India? He remembered from his school days that the shofar would be sounded with the coming of Mashiach. But I don't think Mashiach came. I don't see Elijah anywhere. And would Mashiach actually come to the streets of Mumbai, India? I don't think so. Where's the sound of the shofar coming? He starts running up and down the streets. He doesn't find it. And he hurries to his apartment. And he takes out his calendar. And he looks at the date. And suddenly his heart sank. Because that day was Yom Kippur. It was Yom Kippur. He couldn't believe it. He sat on his bed. He put his head in his hands. How could he not know that that day was Yom Kippur? No matter what, no matter how far he'd gone in life, how distant he'd been from religion and from faith, Yom Kippur was always Yom Kippur, as it is for every one of us Jews. Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur. How could have he fallen so far that he had no inkling that it was the holiest day of the year? Rocking back and forth on his bed, he just broke into tears. Upon further inquiry, he later learned that the man who blew the shofar was the rabbi of the Chabad of Mumbai, who, knowing that there were many Israeli backpackers in the area, was going around the neighborhood and the marketplace blowing the shofar at the end of the sacred time of Yom Kippur, so that every single Jew could know that Yom Kippur had just come to an end, and it was now permissible to eat again. Yaron tossed and turned throughout the entire night. The next morning, he was back on a plane to Israel, determined to correct things and get his life back on track. He began a new journey. He spent the next 3 years in a yeshiva. Shortly thereafter, he got married. He went on to raise a fine Torah-observant family. For years, Yaron never knew the name of that Chabad rabbi who sounded the siren that brought him back to his roots. But then came 2008. The story of the Chabad Shluchim to Mumbai, Rabbi Gabi and Rebbetzin Rivka Holtzberg being murdered by terrorists, while their 2-year-old son at the time, Moishela, was hiding in a closet with the housekeeper. It made international headlines. As the funeral of the young couple played on Israeli television and on media outlets throughout the world, people from all walks of life wept at the sight of these coffins being lowered into their graves at the Mount of Olives Cemetery in Jerusalem. But none wept more than Yaron, who put 2 and 2 together and understood that that was the rabbi that blew that shofar, that touched his soul that night. This man, with his simple act of blowing the shofar in the marketplace that night, saved my life spiritually and had no clue that he had ever done so. I never had the chance to tell him, to thank him. I wish I had. I'm sure in heaven now he knows. He knows. He packed my parachute. So who packed your parachute? Do we acknowledge it? Do we remember it? Do we think about it? Do we think about these moments in our lives that God places there for us? The individuals that we encounter, they're not just coincidences. They've been planned by God for these encounters to take place, close encounters of a holy kind. Elmer Bendina was a navigator on a B-17 bomber in World War II during an unforgettable bombing, a bomb run over Kassel, Germany. His plane was barraged from Nazi anti-aircraft guns. That wasn't unusual, but on this particular occasion, our gas tank was hit. And when the gas tanks are hit, the plane explodes. And yet, we were still alive. We were still flying. It made no sense. A 20 millimeter shell piercing the fuel tank without touching off an explosion, it's impossible. It was only later that they found out exactly what happened. See, on the morning following that implausible bombing raid, the pilot went down to ask the crew chief. He wanted the unexploded shell. He wanted it as a souvenir of their luck that they were hit and they survived. The crew chief told that it wasn't just one shell. We found 11 unexploded shells, and they were all found in the gas tank. 11 unexploded shells, with only one of them exploding would have put the end of all of them. And here, there were 11 of them, all unexploded. When the shells were sent to the disarmers to be diffused, they opened each shell and they found an amazing thing. None of them had any explosive charge in any of them. All 11 were empty shells. They were as clean as a whistle, completely empty. All of them except one. One of them wasn't completely empty. It actually had a small note inside the shell. And on that note was written in the Czech language. And the intelligence people that they had found someone that could read Czech, and they read the note. And this is what it said. This is all we can do for you now. Using Jewish slave labor is never a good idea. Now, I doubt those Jewish prisoners ever got to meet the crew of the F-17 whose lives they saved by bravely leaving those shells uncharged. They probably did not. But the point is that in addition to recognizing and appreciating those who packed our parachutes, we have to remember to do whatever we can to pack the parachutes of others. We have to be there for them. We have to see to it that these encounters are not just a one-way street. It's not just how this encounter could benefit myself, but how I can benefit someone else. Around 7 years ago, there was a man named Israel Lefkowitz. He traveled from New York to Cleveland to attend the funeral of his first cousin once removed. His cousin once removed, his name was Moshe Lefkowitz. Moshe Lefkowitz lived to 97 years old, and Israel Lefkowitz insisted on attending the funeral. And at the funeral, Israel was asked if he wished to say a few words, and he said, indeed, he does. And he stood up before all the mourners, and he said this: some of you may be wondering why I would travel all this way to attend the funeral of a cousin once removed, who lived to a ripe old age. Well, let me explain it in this way. In the prayer known as Yigdal, it says that God repays one who performs acts of kindness according to their effects. According to their effects. What does it mean, according to their effects? It means that when God looks at our deeds, he not only repays us for the act of kindness itself, but for all the byproducts of the act, the offshoots, the derivatives of the simple act. And then addressing himself to the deceased, to Israel Lefkowitz. Israel Lefkowitz went on to say, Rabbi Moshe, 70 years ago, all my father's brothers perished in the concentration camps. Your family, living here in the United States, worked hard to try to save them, but you were not successful, except in the case of my father, whom your family managed to arrange an affidavit, enabling him to escape the fires of Auschwitz. I come to you here as an udmutzel me'esh, as an ember rescued from the fire. I come here on behalf of my family to say thank you. On behalf of myself, on behalf of my wife, on behalf of my children, on behalf of my grandchildren, on behalf of my great grandchildren, Ad Soif Kol Hadoros, for generations on end, I say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, thank you, thank you. I am here to pay respects today, for it had not been for your family, of whom you are the last living member, our family would not have been. You see, folks, acts of kindness are not viewed in isolation on high. They are, in fact, record for the effects and the effects of the effects for all time to come. For all those that you have helped, it's not just them that you are helping, it's their entire family. It's their children, it's their grandchildren, it's their family, it's all of their family. And it's their family to come in future generations as well. Close encounters of a holy kind, for holiness lives on eternally. I'd like to conclude with one final story. A number of years ago, a woman in Israel named Esther, a mother of 3 children, was widowed in her 40s when her husband died of a sudden heart attack. Now, even when her husband Meir was alive, the family barely scraped by each month. But now it's 10 months after his passing, and she's burdened with supporting the family, with caring for the children, with tending to the house. She was completely overwhelmed. She was broken. To top it all off, one fine day, the home's dud shemesh, the solar water boiler, suddenly burst, and water started flooding all throughout the house. The woman was beside herself. She had no idea what to do. This was the last that she needed that day. She's struggling as it is. She's broken. She's wounded. And now there's water coming from everywhere. And she takes a look at her youngest son, Levi, who at the age of 9 had to grow up very quickly since his father's passing. With his 2 older brothers away at yeshiva, Levi had to become his mom's right-hand man. And she realized that she had leaned on him perhaps more than she should have, but try as she may, she couldn't get by without some help. And so Levi was always there for her. And that day, as Esther is watching water gushing from her boiler, she couldn't hold back the torrent of tears that flowed from her eyes. She just lost it. She collapsed in tears, crying hysterically. Poor little Levi. He's 9 years old. He lost his father 10 months ago, and now he's watching his mother just totally lose control. And so Levi says, Ima, let me help. Maybe we should call a plumber. Not a bad idea. Without waiting for her to respond, Levi picked up the phone. He looked through the kitchen drawer where all the phone numbers were always scribbled, and he found the name Uri the handyman. He remembered Uri the handyman. Uri is the guy we always called when something broke. Let's call Uri the handyman. And little Levi, 9 years old, takes the phone, dials Uri the handyman's number. Uri is the guy that can fix anything. And Levi says, Uri the handyman, we need your help. Our solar water heater is burst. There's water everywhere. Shortly thereafter, Uri was there with his tool belt hugging his waist, and he walks into the apartment with his friendly hello, and he sees the stream of water coming down the hallway. He sees water everywhere. His boots are slushing through the water, and he quickly shuts the valves on the water heater to shut more water from coming. And he's looking at the damages, but he sees the mom, and he sees her state of being. And he says, don't worry, I'll clean everything up. I'll take care of things. And Levi's watching all of Uri's moves. And he says, Levi, you want to help me? Yeah, I want to help. Let's first get some towels. Let's get a mop. Let's start cleaning up together. And he begins together, Uri and Levi begins cleaning the apartment, mopping up the water, wiping out, making it all dry. And her eyes are still red from the tears. Esther begins coming back to herself. And when Uri finished the cleanup mess, she nonchalantly asked him, okay, so what's it going to cost to get a new boiler here? Looking at her, Uri didn't miss the redness in her eyes. He can tell that she had been crying. And he looked at Levi's anxious face, and his heart broke for the sad plight of the family. And then turning to them both, he said, today is your lucky day. Lucky day? Lucky day? Look at our apartment. What do you mean lucky day? Oh, it's lucky. You see, the Iriyah, the municipality, just announced yesterday that they're giving out vouchers to replace all old boilers, water boilers. And your model is on the list. Anyone that has your model is entitled to a voucher, brand new one, no cost whatsoever to you. I'll be back in about an hour with a brand new water boiler. I'll install it. The municipality is going to pay for everything. They'll even pay for my labor. It's not going to cost you a thing. Levi hears these words. He jumps for joy. He's thrilled. He knows how much relief this is bringing to his mother. And sure enough, an hour later, Uri comes knocking on the door. He has a helper, an assistant with him. Together, they put in the new Ud Shemesh given as a gift by the municipality, according to Uri. Let's fast forward some 25 years. Uri is now in his 70s. It wasn't easy for him to get around. He suffered from asthma. His knees gave him trouble. He wasn't able to walk without a great deal of pain. And due to his asthmatic condition, it was very difficult for him to breathe the air in his stifling apartment. His doctor kept on telling him, Uri, you must get an air conditioner. It's dangerous for you to live like this without air, especially someone in your condition. You must get an air conditioner. And as months passed and his breathing became more labored, he realized his doctor was right. And although he couldn't afford it, he knew he would have to get something. And so he ordered an air conditioner unit from a store. He asked for the least expensive air conditioner that there was. 2 days later, the air conditioner arrived. However, it wasn't the cheap model that he ordered. It was the most expensive one on the market. So he asked the installer, hold it. You're not putting that in. No. I know this game. I order the cheap one. You come, you deliver the expensive one, and then you're going to give me the bill. No, you're not installing this air conditioner. This is not what I ordered. The installer says, look, I just take my orders from my boss. I don't know what to tell you. Uri's getting upset. No, you'll tell your boss, I ordered the cheaper one. I'm not letting you put this one in and give me the bill. So the fellow says, you know what, let me call him. Let's get him on the phone. The installer picks up his phone. He calls the boss and he says, the fellow here is saying that's not what he ordered. He doesn't let me to install it. He's not paying the bill. And the boss says, just tell him I'll be over to resolve this problem. I'll be over soon. So Uri is waiting, the installer is waiting, and there's a knock on the door. The fellow comes to Uri opens the door, and the fellow is there. And he says, I don't know what you're complaining about. The air conditioner that you were delivered, there's no bill for you. It was totally paid for. I mean, totally paid for. He says, you didn't hear? The Iriyah, the municipality, they announced yesterday that anyone that has an asthmatic condition gets a free air conditioner. Uri is staring at the man, and the fellow says, you don't recognize me. My name is Levi. My name is Levi. I was 9 years old. I've never forgotten you, Uri. I have never forgotten you. What you did that day for my mom, I knew the municipality wasn't paying for any solar water heaters. I knew you paid for that. And I've never, ever forgotten the kindness of that moment. So no, you're not getting your cheap air conditioner. You're getting the best one that I have, and you're not paying a penny for it because the municipality paid for it. You changed our lives that day. Uri, I want you to know, said Levi, you changed our lives. Who packed your parachute? And whose parachute have you packed? King Solomon writes in the book of Koheles, cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it. Goodness doesn't occur in a vacuum. Every act of kindness has a way of coming back to you at one time or another, in one form or another. That's just the way kindness works. And in fact, we're taught that in the long run, acts of Ahavas Yisrael, acts of kindness one for another, acts of charity, acts of tzedakah, they benefit the giver more than they do the recipient. In the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, it is one of the beautiful compensations in life that we can never help another without helping ourselves. Little do we know which crossing of paths can be a close encounter of the holy kind, one that will impact and affect the lives of our fellow human beings and perhaps our own lives for years, if not generations to come. So let's go pack some parachutes. Good night, everybody. I look forward to having you Wednesday afternoon at 12:30. We're going to continue our discussion on the chosen people. Visit jewishacademy.com for the link. Again, that's jewishacademy.com for the link for our Wednesday 12:30 class on Zoom. I look forward to seeing you then. Take care, everyone.